Hi, this is David Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, as always, it's wonderful to have you along. And do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And we have a sponsor for this episode, and then we're out of sponsors. So if next week there's no show, you'll understand why. But if you're thinking of sponsoring, this is the time. This one is sponsored by Tzvi Warshor. Hi, Rabbi Orlofsky. I have listened to most of your Shiurim and shows over these many years and have gained from them and enjoyed them very much. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I've said it before. I'll say it again. The fact that so many people are willing to take time out and listen to me. I'm not talking about the loyal followers who call themselves Rabbi Orlofsky crazies, and I'm not talking about the crazy crazies. I've met at least 6 of them in the past month who have committed to memory everything I have ever said. You know, I can't start a sentence without them finishing it. But even just you dilettantes who listen every once in a while, etc., thank you so much, because I know people who make podcasts and nobody listens, and it's so sad. So thank you, everybody. Okay. I have mentioned more than once that I'm not always sure what to talk about. We're not doing a series. We're not doing a sefer. I sit down each time and I say, so what should I talk about? And I ask anybody who happens to be around for ideas. And if not, I just wait to see if something hits me. Yeah. So unbeknownst to me, producer Yisrael put up on the WhatsApp group. And for those of you who are not familiar, there is a Rabbi Orlofsky WhatsApp group for suggestions. And a number of people submitted a number of ideas. And there was one of them that I felt like I needed to address sooner rather than later. It reads as follows. When I was in seminary and asked Rabbi Orlofsky the question of Agunot, he gave an answer that didn't really sit well with me. That was 20 years ago, but the gist was that the men need to be in control in order for the marriage to work, and that we couldn't and shouldn't put anything in place that would stop them from being and feeling in control, and that we never put loopholes in any other area. Why would we in this area? I would love to know if I remember his answer correctly, or if there's a better answer now about the Agunot problems that seem to be so prevalent in the community. Thank you. That's not exactly what I said. I took 4 college courses in an attempt to make my parents happy. And then I realized nothing I would do would ever make them happy, so I just stopped. I couldn't see spending 4 years. And I have tremendous respect for people who do. I wasn't planning on becoming a doctor or an engineer or anything that I really needed professional work with that would have necessarily helped me, that I needed a college degree for. But my parents, being Jewish parents, felt like everybody needs to go to college. Jackie Mason once said Jewish kids were going to colleges before there were colleges. Their parents used to make them stand in a field and say, stand here till they build a college. You know, and it's taken on an avodah zarah status, and especially when you see what's going on campuses now, one really needs to reconsider what a college degree is worth in the general world. So I went to Queens College, Night College, when I was in Chavetz Chaim in Forest Hills. And I signed up for Introduction to Psychology and Sociology, neither of which impressed my parents. But that was the direction I would head in. Obviously, it would be something in, psychology or something like that. And they weren't too impressed. So I didn't sign up again. When I ran away from home, which is how my parents still refer to my moving out to Los Angeles, well, I was teaching and learning out there. And they made another push. So I went to a night college at Valley College, the local community college. And I decided this time I'll take what I'm interested in. And I took journalism and broadcasting, because it just sounded more interesting to me. I figure if they're not going to be happy with what I do anyway, I might as well take something that I found interesting. And I have to say, of all of the courses I took, journalism was the most interesting. It was being taught by someone who used to be an editor at the LA Times. And he knew all the dirty side of journalism, which is what I found absolutely fascinating. He taught me a few things, not me, but to the class, that I found fascinating. The most effective way to fold a piece of paper to get the most writing on it. He says you hold it and make two folds, so you have basically a vertical, and you have 6 columns, and it allows you to write the most. He also said, always carry a lot of pens. He says, because, if you run out of paper, you can always write on your shirt sleeve, or you can pull out your shirt tail and write on it. But if you run out of a pen, you're really messed up. You don't know what to do. So another piece of advice. But he gave 2 other pieces of advice that I found helpful. And one of them was learn how to read upside down. So that way, when you're interviewing somebody and they get a phone call, you can read everything on their desk. This is the kind of class it was. It was just great, And the other thing he said is like this: if you have a really good question, don't ask it at the press conference, because then the TV people will just dub in their own guy asking the question and the guy giving the answer, and you'll have used up your great question. So he says, what you do is you wait till the end of the press conference and you position yourself in the doorway. So when the guy's leaving, he has to pass by you. And let's say he, made this press conference to announce his support for the new, a stadium that was going to be built. So as he's leaving, you say, so just to be clear, you oppose the building of the stadium? Now he has no choice. He has to say, no, I'm in favor of the stadium. And then you say, oh, is that because your brother-in-law won the contract? So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I've incorporated some of these things into life. I often take more than one pen with me. And but that idea is also that you say, okay, so let me get clear. You said the following. No, that's exactly not what I said. Yeah. So there are some elements to what I said in that response. I will try to clarify it, and I will accept all of the responsibility. Clearly, I was not that clear. Why do I say that? Because since I was teaching Mesilas Yesharim, probably no place did he actually mention an Agunah. The question must have come up agav, and so I probably gave my answer in shorthand. So I will assume total responsibility for the fact that the lack of clarity, but I'm going to try to say it a little clearer if I can now. The problem of Agunah is obvious, and that is, of course, that only a man can give a get to his wife. This gives him a position of power over his wife, which is not the intention of the Torah, obviously. Nobody would imagine that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that only a man can give the get to his wife in order for him to blackmail her or to, cause her pain, etc. That's and some people look at this as a flaw in the system. And therefore, there are those people who suggest writing a prenup that guarantees that upon divorce, they will have to give him a get. There are others who hold that makes the whole Kedushin puzzle if you put in a prenup. I'm not going to get into the halachic ramifications. Suffice it to say, there are some people who are very much in favor of it and some people who are very opposed to it. I think New York State passed the get law, which says that you have to, if you have to remove any impediment to your wife being able to get remarried in order for you to get a divorce. There are others who hold that that is considered coercion. And in order to be able to give a get, you have to give it by ratzon. Now, having said that, it's a very strange thing in the Gemara. If Beis Din says you have to get a get and you refuse, they can beat you until you agree to give the get. That's not called coercion. Why? Because the Gemara says, because really the guy wants to do the right thing and give the get, but his Yetzer Hara is stopping him. So you got to beat the devil out of him so that when he says, yes, I want to give the get, he's not saying it because of the beating. The beating just weakened the Yetzer Hara enough in him that he wants to do the right thing. This seems like a very strange idea. But I've spoken about this in the past where people have asked me, what if who I really am is somebody evil? Like in my essence, I'm evil. I said, you believe that you're really mamish somebody who's evil? Darth Vader? And then I realized that's not a good example because he does tshuva at the end of the movie. I can't be. You mean Voldemort, who split his soul so many times that there was nothing left? That was, spoiler alert, skip the next part if you're still waiting to read it. In book 7, when he dies and he sees this little scaly, creature over there, that's all that's left of Voldemort in the future because he split his soul so many times. There's nothing left to him to continue onwards, And he says to Dumbledore, "Who is that?" He says, "You can't help him. He's too far gone." So, you're Voldemort. You split your soul so many times that your mamash a shtick evil. So I said, let me ask you a question. When you die and you get up to Shemayim, are you going to be plotting how to overthrow God like Satan in Paradise Lost? Are you going to be wanting to do Averis? Of course not. It's your goof that makes you want to do it. What the Gemara in Brachas refers to as the Sa Sheba'isa, the yeast in the dough. That's what makes us want to go out and do bad things. And so once you don't have your body, of course, your pure soul is not going to want to do anything evil. So it's only because you're stuck here. I've told this story before, but when the Ger Tzedek of Vilna was being burnt at the stake, the executioner said, "I'm burning you in this world, but I guess you'll burn me in the next world." And he says to him, I grew up as a nobleman. When you're a nobleman, there aren't too many noble children to play with. So I played with the peasant children, and one time they broke my toys. And I went to my father and I said, "You're the nobleman, put them to death." My father looked at me and he says, "At 21, you'll become a nobleman in your own right. If you want to kill them, then you can." He says, "When I became 21, do you think I wanted to kill these people because as children, they broke my toys?" He says, "What are you burning, my body?" He says, "My soul is going to go up to heaven, and what do you think? I'm going to be troubled by petty feelings like revenge and hatred, jealousy. I'm going to be way above all those things. I'm not going to want to hurt you." So when we get up to Shemayim, of course we want to do the right thing. So a person who didn't give his wife a get, when he gets up to Shemayim, he's gonna have to deal with that terrible thing that he did. His soul never wanted to do that. So that's not called coercion. But if a person wants to, now here in Israel, we're not allowed to give beatings anymore. Yeah. But we can take away your passport. We can freeze your accounts. And the Beis Din can put you in prison. And there are stories of people who sat in prison for 25 years and died in prison and never gave their wife a get. Wow, that's an action. That is somebody. I mean, I'm stubborn, but there's a limit, My shipper said to me once, Dovid, I'll tell you action. Don't be an action. I said, Rabbi, what do you want from me? I have a heart condition. He goes, okay, forget it. Do what you want. I get stuck sometimes, and reminds me of one of the most clever lines in The Princess Bride, where at the end, after Nia Montoya had killed the six-fingered man who killed his father, that was his goal his whole life. Yeah. So he says to him, what are you going to do now? He goes, well, I've spent my whole life trying to get vengeance, and now I have it. Doesn't leave me a lot of options. So, the auction, they cut off your nose to spite your face. It's a sad reality. So, but there are people like that. And so this wife says, why did Kadosh Baruch Hu set up the Torah this way? So there are no good answers. I heard somebody once say, listen, the fact that there are certain illnesses that we don't have a cure for is not the fault of the rabbis. Yeah, it's nobody's fault. We don't have a cure for it yet. So you don't say, well, it's the doctor's fault. Why don't they have a cure? We haven't found a cure yet. And he says, you're right. This is a problem, but we don't have a cure for it. I contest the basic assumption that this is an epidemic. Yeah, there are definitely cases of Agunah, and I don't think they're as prevalent as people think. We hear about the high-profile ones, but very often I find that women say that they're an Agunah. Why? Because they refuse to make any concessions to their husbands in regard to child support or visitation or things like that. And so he says, well, I'm not giving you a get until we work these things out. And then she says, I'm an Agunah. I've seen cases like that. So I know there are cases where there are Rishoyim who are mamish withholding a get, but I don't believe it's as prevalent as certain online sources would have us believe. I'd like to see somebody put it together, an exact number, because I've seen people who claim to be Agunas, and I know when you look into the case, that's not the case. The case is that they're blackmailing their husband into making concessions that they're not entitled to, so that they can clear their name from being, a person who's refusing a get. I know situations where the husband wants to give the get and the wife won't accept it. So let's keep it in proportion. It's a problem, but I don't believe it's an epidemic. Yeah. So, but it's a problem. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu set it up that only the man can give a get? So for years, when I would answer this, I could only take it so far. And people say, why can only the man give a get and not the wife? So I would answer technically, well, because the man gives the Kedushin. And since the man gives the Kedushin, the man creates the marriage. Only the man can break the marriage by giving the get. Now, that won't last for too long, because somebody will say back to me, fine, so let them both give Kedushin and let them both give Gittin. And then I'm basically stuck with Gezeres HaKosov. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu set it up, and that's why it didn't make any sense. And that was the best answer that I had for years. 35 years ago, there was an article that appeared in a women's magazine called Marie Claire. I think that's the name. And the article was called Dial a Mistress. Now, I didn't know about this article. Full disclosure, I don't read Marie Claire. I don't know how many of these lady magazines are still around. They used to be Red Book, used to be Ladies' Home Journal. when my wife would get a copy of Ladies' Home Journal, I would read the column, "Can this marriage be saved?" Where the man gives his version and the wife gives her version, and then the counselor gives their version, So I would find that interesting. But for the most part, I didn't really peruse women's magazines. So I didn't know about this. How did it come up? I was in a question and answer session, and someone said to me, "What about a pilegish?" And I was like, what? No one has ever asked me about the din of a pilegesh. And I found out that this came about, this question, and the whole takufa, the whole period of time that people were asking me the pilegesh question was less than 6 months until this article died down. And so I got a copy of the article and I read through it to get some insight into what was going on. Here's the background, right? There is something in the Torah called Kiddushin and Nisuin, marriage, right? Kiddushin is often translated as engagement. It's not. The better word for it is a betrothal. It's a worse word for it because no one knows what a betrothal is. I used to be a Trekkie, and I remember where in Amok Time, Spock was like, suddenly gets this drive that he has to return to Vulcan and get married, and he says, he used some Vulcan word for his relationship, more than a betrothal, less than a marriage. That's Kiddushin. Luckily, Star Trek was mechavan to it, Makes sense because, Leonard Nimoy, the Vulcan salute, he got this from the Birkas Kahanim. That's where he got that from. Live long and prosper. Yeah, live long and prosper. So that's where it comes from. Anyway, we have something called Kiddushin and Nisuin. That's marriage. We only have two other arrangements. One is called Znus, which is called immorality. Yeah. That's where a person has a relationship with a member of the opposite gender that is not Kiddushin and Nisuin. And then there's this din called a pilegesh, translated into English as concubine, wherein, apparently, a man and woman can live together, Ke'ilu they're married, what we call in American law common law marriage, without the benefit of marriage. It's living together. And she is called your pilegesh. She's not your wife, she's a pilegesh. And suddenly I got hit with this question out of left field, and I had no idea what to do with it. So I spoke to somebody in the field, and I said, I don't know how to answer pilegesh. I've given lots of shiurim on marriage, how wonderful marriage is, and husband and wife, and Adam and Chava, began Eden Mikedem, and all that kind of stuff. I never had a case of Adam and Eve and Sue, who he sees on the weekends. I had no idea how to deal with this question. So he pointed to a Rosh Hashiva. He says, go to him. He'll give you a dishonest answer. I figured, okay, that's a start. So I go to him and he says, pilegesh. He says, what are you bringing pilegesh for? The Rambam says it only applies to malachim, only applies to kings. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? It says Avram had a pilegesh. Yeah. He says, yeah, because they had a din of malchus. Yeah. What about the pilegesh begiva? That's how you know this guy was a chashuv person. It was only for chashuvim, for malachim, for people like that who would have a pilegesh. So, okay, that sounds great. So I go back to the guy and I said, why was that a dishonest answer? He says to me, because the Ramban doesn't say that. In Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah doesn't say that. Lahalocha. Rabbi Yaakov Emden has a 10-page tshuva why he feels like we should mater pilegesh bezman hazeh. But he says I wouldn't do it unless the other Gedolim agreed with me, and they didn't. So he brings down all the Makaros. I went through the tshuva, and sure enough, there are a lot of sources. So the dishonest answer is, the Rambam says it's only for kings. Or the other dishonest answer is, Rashi says a pilegesh is an isha just without a ksuva, meaning it's a regular marriage. I just didn't give her a ksuva. But these other sources would all seem to indicate that a pilegesh is just a guy and a gal decide, hey, let's live together as if we're married, and we're not. And I was like, gosh, that doesn't work in with all of my shiurim on marriage. Yeah, how am I going to deal with this? And I don't know that I ever came up with a really good answer as to why the Torah allowed the concept of pilagshus. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was talking about a situation where a man can't divorce his wife, i.e., his wife goes crazy and he can't give her a get. So, let him take a pelagish, as if wife, in order for this to go on. So the reason Marie Claire, this article got written up, is because apparently there were some people in Brooklyn who put together what they called the Pilegish Hotline, wherein there would be people who, for whatever reason, wanted to have an extramarital relationship, and these from people in Brooklyn would facilitate it. Apparently, there were older singles who were happy to be able to have some kind of a relationship. All the best guys were taken already, so I'll take one of them, and I'm happy to be on the side. And they talk about different stories, so that Marie Claire got a hold of them. And they tell a story of this one particular frum couple where the wife was not interested in marital relations. And so he found an older single who was content to be a pilegesh, and they set up a different part of, made her own apartment in the house, etc. And the wife was very happy with it because it took the pressure off of her, and she was happy because now she had like somebody who was like a husband to her. And it was a terrible article. I struggled to be able to come up with an approach why a Kodesh Baruch Hu would do this. And during this 6 months period, when people would ask me for Pelegish, I would do the best that I could. And it took me a very long time to be able to come up with an approach. But during this 6 month period, somebody asked me the question about Agunah. And suddenly I realized why this Pelegish question popped up for this very small window of time. So while I was struggling with the whole Pelegish issue, so someone asked me about Agunah. So I went down the only road I knew how to travel, and I said, the reason only the man can give the get is because the man gives the kedushin. So he says, well, then let them both give the kedushin and let them both give the get. And then the light bulb went off, and I said, now I understand. You want to be a pilegesh. I suddenly figured it out. You want that both of them should be able to create the relationship, and both of them should be able to end the relationship. That's pelagshus. Now I understand where the Torah created it. Because if you have a woman who's terrified that if I get married, maybe the guy will blackmail me and not give me a get, I'll say to the guy, listen, I know you want to get married and have kids, and that's fine, but I don't want to accept kedushin from you because you might turn out to be a lunatic and not give me a get. So instead, I'll be your pilegesh. We'll live together. No one has to know. We'll call ourselves Mr. and Mrs. whatever. And if it turns out that this is not working out, I'll pick up my stuff and I'll leave. So you just want to be pelagshus. Now I understand. That's why the Torah created it, for somebody like you who's terrified of marriage. And she looks at me horrified and says, no, I don't want to be a Pelegish. I want to be an Isha. I said, no, you don't. The Torah defines what Ishus is. Ishus is the man gives the Kiddushin and the man gives the get. You want a relationship where they both create it and they both end it. That's a Pelegish. A concubine. There's no word that makes a woman's skin crawl off of her body as much as concubine. I said, you want to be a concubine. Concubine, concubine, concubine. Yeah. Now, she couldn't explain why she didn't want to be a Pelegish, but she wants to redefine marriage as Pelagius. You don't have to. There's already something. And not only that, it's an amazing thing. I bet dollars to donuts that if a woman said to a guy, listen, I'd like to spend my life together with you, but I don't want to be Makabel Kiddushin. I want to live with you as a Pelegesh. Most guys would be like, yeah, that's fine with me. And every woman says, no, I don't want to be a Pelegesh. Why? You have more rights in Pelagius than you do in marriage. You don't want a marriage. Because in a marriage is the possibility that the husband could blackmail you. You want to be a Pelegesh. And by the way, that'll open up many more options for you. And no woman was able to explain to me why she doesn't want to be Pelegish. Because I want to have children. I said, you're going to have children? Children born out of wedlock are not mamzerim. That's in the secular world. By us, you can have children. You can write up an agreement, a financial agreement. We split everything 50-50. By the way, you'll have more financial rights that way than you do with Kiddushin and Gittin. I said, I want people to know I'm married. I said, no problem. We'll give you a certificate from the Pelagius Institute. Nobody ever reads the ksuva on the wall. We'll write it in Aramaic. We'll draw doves and flowers on it. You can have it framed, put it up on the wall. No one's going to read it and say, 1 second, you're a Pelegish? No one has to know. It's perfect. And if it turns out that the marriage doesn't work out, pick up your stuff and go. To this day, no woman has ever explained to me why she doesn't want to be a Pelegish if she's worried about becoming an Agunah. So instead of taking marriage and adding in a prenup, just say to the guy, I want to be a Pelegish. And I'm sure it'll only increase your dating options. And the woman looks at me shocked because she doesn't know why she wants to be an Isha and not a Pelegish. She wants to take Ishus and turn it into Pelagius. She wants to turn the concept of a wife into a concubine where they both make the relationship and they end the relationship. It's great when you're a Pelegish. If it's not working up, just pick up your stuff and leave. I don't need a get. I don't need any formalized thing. And if we wrote an agreement beforehand, we'll split everything financially. It works good. And by the way, the children belong to the wife in a Pelagius. So we just take the kids and leave too. She doesn't even have to give him any child support. He doesn't have to give any child support. She doesn't have to give any visitation. She could take her kids and leave if she wants to. Al pi halacha. So how come a woman wants to be an Isha? And it's very strange. Because the average guy would be just as happy with a Pelagius relationship, I would say, more so than marriage. Whereas a woman, Dafka, wants marriage even though she runs the risk of an Agunah. So don't complain about Agunah. Tell everybody to become a Pelegish. You solve the problem. That's my point. Why doesn't a woman want Pelagius? I think that's great. Be a concubine. It's better for you. You have more rights. I believe that's why the Torah invented Pelagius for these women who are so terrified that their husband might suddenly turn out to be a nut. And now they'd have to never worry about being an Agunah. So I have a general principle. Why did Hashem set things up this way? Hashem is all-knowing. It's very smart. I maintain that the reason it was set up this way, that the man creates the Kiddushin and the man ends the Kiddushin, is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands people very well. He knows men would be very happy with a Pelegish and a woman would not. Why? Because I've asked this to audiences. of all religious persuasions and all ages. Who wants to get married more, men or women? And everyone agrees, women. One person said it to me great. He said, no little boy dressed up as a chassan on Purim. He doesn't dream about being a chassan. Little girls dress up as a kala. That's a dream of them, to be able to be a kala at a wedding, to be able to be a bride. There's a magazine called Bride. There's no magazine called Groom. Guys aren't flipping through pictures of, grooms and tuxedos. Oh, look at that corsage. What do you think about that? Therefore, men have a mitzvah to get married. Women do not. I love that one when people say to me, oh, in the Orthodox community, you want the women to be barefoot and pregnant. I say, first of all, they can wear slippers. That's number one. Number two is they don't have to be pregnant. They don't even have to get married. A woman who says, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have children, is not a problem. She's not over anything. The mitzvah of Pira V'Rivya, be fruitful and multiply, were only given to men. It wasn't given to women. Granted, they have to find a woman who's willing to help them fulfill the mitzvah. But a woman who says, I don't want to get married, there's no problem. A man who says, I don't want to get married and have children, he's going to have some splaining to do, Lucy. You got some splaining to do. You have a mitzvah to get married and have children. Yeah? Whether the marriage itself is a mitzvah or a hechsher mitzvah, that machlekes I'm not going to get into. Yeah? But getting married and having children is a mitzvah for the man, not for the woman. Why? Because you don't have to command women to get married, just like there's no mitzvah, thou shalt breathe. It goes without saying. You're going to breathe. I'm talking about breathing normal. When you go to the doctor and he goes, deep breath. Again, until you hyperventilate, you know what I mean? I'm not talking about that, but I don't have a mitzvah to breathe. That goes without saying. Yeah? Of course you understand that. But the man needs a mitzvah to get married because he might decide, what do I need this for? As in fact, in the secular world, many men are doing that. The rate of marriage has plunged along with the birth rate. Because people say, what do I need this for? There was a whole movement, forget about in the liberal movement where they feel like, what do I need this for? But even in the conservative movement, there's a movement where they say, the laws in America are stacked against men. A woman can file for divorce, doesn't have to give any reason, and take half of everything the man has. So why would I ever get married? What do I need this for? And then they can take my children away, make me pay child support, and then do all kinds of shtick and not let me see my kids. I'm not going to get married and have kids. And there are people who have to fight against this. And when people say, why should I get married and have kids? If you don't believe in God, I can't think of any reason why. So men have a mitzvah to get married because they might very likely not figure it out. Psychologists out there will tell you that very often when a man wants to end a marriage, he doesn't come out and say, I want a divorce. Women institute divorce much more than men. Men just become passive aggressive. They close down, they stop coming home, and they pull out of the relationship. But they're too much of a wimp to actually say, okay, this marriage is not working. Let's either go for therapy or get divorced. Some do. I don't mean to generalize. Some do. But as a rule, it's the woman who says, okay, this is not working out for me. You're clearly not committed to this relationship. And then the man says, well, if you feel that way, then I guess we should just end this. Phew. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands that men and women are different. Let's go right out there. I was teaching in Discovery once, and somebody says to me, I don't believe there's any differences between men and women. I said, look around the room, take a couple of minutes, and tell me if you can spot any differences. And she says, okay, physical differences. I say, okay, physical differences? You think the fact that one person, the left side of their brain is more dominant and the other one, the right side of the brain is more dominant, doesn't affect their development? You think the fact that one is filled with testosterone and the other one with estrogen doesn't make any difference? You think that one of them can go through menstruation and pregnancy and the other one can't? You don't think that makes any difference in the development of the person's mental approach? Please, for centuries, people have been writing about the difference between how men and women think. Of course they do. And anyone who has children knows this for a fact. You know, I don't care what they say, nature, nurture, it doesn't matter. Girls think one way and guys think another way. It's just a fact. And so, and that's when I say who wants to get married more, women want to get married, men don't want to so much. So we give them a mitzvah to get married and we tell them, you're going to take responsibility for this marriage. You're going to make it and you're going to break it. No wimping out. You decide it doesn't work, you give the get. Not the wife. And a wife who's nervous about that, by all means, become a pilegesh. You got plenty of options. Plenty of guys will sign up for that because guys aren't interested in having that commitment over their head anyway. When I used to teach in the Neve Yerushalayim, so very often I would be invited from the girls' side to a vart. I'm on the men's side, and the chassan sitting next to me with these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young Bali Tshuva, you know, with a hat that, you know, is bigger than his head, you know, and he's just sitting there with a big smile. And I get up to speak, and I say, you know, this is a major, big move. Marriage. It's forever. And I look at him and I go, forever and forever and forever. And the sweat starts dripping down his face. These guys don't really think of that. Girls, before they get engaged, they go through a lot of angst. Do I want to marry this person the rest of my life? I'm going to become pregnant. I'll move in with him. I have to go where he goes. Things, you know, I'm going to lose independence. Guys are like, you cook? Okay, I'll live here. You know, they don't go through a lot of angst before they get married because they didn't think about it too much. Jerry Seinfeld said, I guess you girls are wondering what we men are really thinking. Nothing. We're just walking down the street. That's how we are. You know, we don't spend a lot of time thinking through when it comes to relationships. And that's why every girl knows when a guy gets married, you have to train them on how to be in a relationship because they don't know. They're not good with commitment. I'll be happy to go into a plagshus. That'd be great. And then anytime, you know, it doesn't work out, I'll just become passive aggressive and she'll leave. And I'll be like, oh, gee, sorry, that didn't work out. So we say, you're going to make it and you're going to break it. Now, does that create an opportunity for abuse? Of course it does. But anytime you give somebody responsibility, it has the possibility for abuse. And therefore, a guy who's driving the Amtrak train is texting and doesn't pay attention and the train derails, Maisa Shahaya. Or the guy driving the Staten Island ferry was high and he crashes into the pier because we gave him responsibility. Or you have a cop who decides to become corrupt. Or a judge who becomes corrupt. Anytime you give somebody responsibility, they can abuse that responsibility. The only way to avoid that is anarchy. Nobody's put in charge of anything. Everybody's completely on their own. There's no cops, there's no judges, there's no army, there's no politicians, there's no anything. Because anytime there's a position where someone has responsibility, they can become abusive. Dentist is having a bad day or he doesn't like you and he causes you more pain than is necessary. I stress then is necessary because every dentist causes you pain. It's part of the profession, Right? Some of them do it more than is necessary, So therefore what? Don't have any dentists? So yeah. Now that's why I say I go back to what I said at the beginning. I'm not talking about how many agunas there are. This is the question. How many marriages that begin with Kiddushin end with Aguna? So the majority of marriages do not end in divorce. And those that do, the majority of those are not an Aguna. So we're talking about a tiny percentage. So you want to take all of Kiddushin and turn it into Pelagshis because of that fraction of a percent? That is what I call throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Kiddushin and Nisuin have served the Jewish people well for millennia. You don't want to get involved because you're too afraid? Then no problem. Tell the shadchan, I want pelagshis, I don't want marriage. Trust me. You know how they always say the boy has a list? You'll have a list. Plenty of boys will be happy to take you on as a pelegish and not have to have the responsibility of marriage. God gives them that responsibility because he knows that men are not good at relationships. So they gave him that responsibility. So you say, well, take it away from them because they might abuse it. Good. Never have a bus driver or a pilot because they might abuse their responsibility. Never have a doctor or anybody else in a position of responsibility because they might abuse it. So the Torah says, I set this condition up right. Okay, what happens if you have a bad guy? So beat him until he says yes. But at the end of the day, is it possible to abuse a system? Of course it is. And we all know stories of educators, who were abusive. We all know stories. They make it into the press. And yet I'm going to go out on the line and say, most educators have not abused their children that are in their care. Yeah, but some of them did. So let's do away with education. Let's never have any teachers because they might end up abusing their students. So what happened instead? Instead, I've spoken to people about education. They're terrified. Terrified. So where I would have a Rebbe who would put his arm around me and say, Reb Dovid, you got to that. Today you can't do that because you'll go to jail. When I ran NCSY, an advisor would call up a kid and take him out to a ball game. Can't do that today. You'll go to jail. So everybody walks around scared. That's a better system. But where there was a yachas between a Rebbe and a Talmud, that's gone. Rav Moshe Shapiro, on very rare occasions, would give somebody a patch for saying something ridiculous. And it was a sign of success if you could get a patch out of him, because most people, he would just give him the look. It wasn't worth his time. You had to be close to him to have him give you that little patch. He didn't beat you, but he gave you a patch. Today he'd go to jail. So, okay. So we're so terrified. No problem. I have an easy solution. I just solved the Agunah problem. Any woman who's worried that you might be marrying a nut, first of all, I would say, I don't know why you're getting married, but assuming you even have a chashash, say to the shadchan, I'd rather be a pilegish. But the system was set up by HaKadosh Baruch Hu because he understands that men and women are different. And in order to be able to create the institution called marriage, you're afraid of marriage? Become a pelegish, but don't destroy marriage in your. So I say, I'll take marriage, and both of them break the relationship, and both of them break it. We already have an option. That's called a pelegish. Don't turn marriage into pelagshis because you're worried about that fraction of a percent that become agunas. Is it a problem? Yes. Should we bring all pressure to bear? Yes. Financial, communal, whatever we can do to pressure these people. But don't destroy the entire institution of marriage because of a few bad eggs. That's my opinion on the subject, and that's how I approach it. And that brings us to the question and answer portion of our program. We do not have a sponsor for the question and answer this week. You have that option. People who find the amount of sponsoring a whole episode but would like to do something have that option. By Anonymous. Every empire falls. How much longer will the USA last? And do you think it will happen in our lifetime? I forgot who said it first. I've heard it quoted many times. When we talk about the fall of all of the great empires, so people ask, what about America? The answer I heard is, when it comes to America, it's like a fellow who fell off the Empire State Building. And after 40 floors, he says, well, so far, so good. Predicting the downfall of America, you have to understand, most of these empires lasted a very long time. America is pushing 300 years. Yeah, they're not there yet. More like 250. It's only 250 years. In historical terms, that's not a lot. So it's very, very young in terms of empire. You know, when you look up the history of France and you're going back to Gaul in the time of the Roman Empire, you're going about the Holy Roman Empire. You know, you talk about England, there was a whole history there before the Norman invasion in 1066. You're going back almost 1,000 years. You know, talk about America, you know, ancient times, the French and Indian War in the 1700s. You're dealing with a completely different time frame. But I would like to say two other things in this regard. One is, there has never been an empire like the United States in the history of the world, for a few reasons. One is, even though it's been chipped away, particularly in the last administration, it was built on the concept of freedom. We don't force religion on anybody. We don't stop people from having the opportunity to speak. We give people freedom. That really has never happened before in history. You'll hear the expression state-run media. The only state-run media we have is PBS, and hopefully the Trump administration will get rid of that. But otherwise, everyone can say whatever they want. The Biden administration tried to establish from 1984 the Ministry of Truth, where we decide what the truth is and we silence everybody else. And they did all this kind of shtick to stop free speech, but hopefully we're coming back from that. And so people should be able to have that opportunity. That never existed. The other thing is tremendous amount of chesed. I think it was Lord Asquith. I really should look it up because I've been quoting it for so many years. And I don't know why I still think it was Lord Asquith. But it once said, Britain has neither allies nor enemies. We only have national interest. Whatever serves the national interest is what we do. That's it. So America is not that way. America will help people just because. It was built on chesed. And I heard this b'shem one of the Gedolim of 3 generations ago. There's never been an empire that existed where they would just go and help people just because, when it has nothing to do with us and we're not involved. Yeah, with no national interest, just because we care about people. So that's another important thing. So it's hard to tell. I heard, and I didn't see it inside, but I heard that Reb Chaim Volozhiner said that the Gra said when America was founded, this is going to be the last Golus, and from America we'll go into Yemos Mashiach. So that sure sounds to me like the American enterprise is not going to fail like other empires have. There's another amazing thing about America that other countries have tried to copy less successfully, and that is it has a constitution. And they say, this is the rules that we do, and we make a balance of powers. So the executive has certain powers, and the legislation has certain powers, and the courts have certain powers. And therefore, the only thing the Supreme Court can do is interpret the Constitution. That's it. But they can't just decide yes or no about some issue based on their own. That's the difference. When people in Israel are talking about judicial reform, that's because they passed a law at one point. There were 120 seats in the Knesset, the parliament, and there were only 40 people there, and they passed the Supreme Court law, which they added the reasonableness clause, which means it doesn't matter if there's a law. If the Supreme Court decides, nah, we don't think it's reasonable, they can cancel any law the Knesset makes. I mean, that's a dictatorship. That's fascism, And they say, oh, he's attacking democracy. The most anti-democratic thing in the world is the Israeli Supreme Court. It's ridiculous. They could just decide whatever they want just because, nah. So if Netanyahu wants to fire one of his ministers, he goes, no, we don't think that's reasonable. You can't fire him. It's just the craziest thing in the world. And that's just evil. But the American Supreme Court, the only power they have is to interpret the Constitution. Sometimes they do it better and sometimes they do it worse, but that's how it was set up. There's never been anybody, no country, even afterwards, who tried to set up a government that was made this way with these kind of three divisions of power. So that gives America tremendous staying power, I think, more than other ones. And as long as they are the leading voice of support for the Jewish people, and no country has ever been historically as good to the Jewish people as America has, I believe that gives them a special schus to be able to do it. And so I definitely don't see America's decline as an empire happening anytime in the near future. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can sign up for an online shiur. You can sponsor an episode, please. We're out of sponsors. You can sponsor a question and answer. You can sponsor Parsha in 5. You can ask a question. And that's it. Until next time, I am Dovid Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.